I was asked to do this chat about the Andes, partly because there's so few people in the UK who've been down there to do the flying, except for those in the RFGSA. I know some of those are listening now, and people like Guy Westgate and the Sailplane Grand Prix people. It's a fantastic place. I first went there 25 years ago on an exchange, military exchange with the Chilean Air Force, which was set up after the Falklands War. And we were introduced to two-seat flying there for many times. And eventually I joined the Civil Club and have been going down ever since. So a few words about the place. The first thing, I'll talk about the Andes, then talk about the typical weather down there, about the condors, who are a lifeline, about the club itself, the lift we get, the terrain, and then talk about typical sorties, touring, and comps down there. And questions, it's probably best to keep them to the end if you can tap them away, and Luke will keep a score and put them up for us to answer at the end. First about the Andes. A lot of people don't realize that Chile's 4,500 kilometers long, and the Andes of course run through there and a bit. The area we're talking about though is mainly in the middle, where Santiago is, middle north-south that is, and of course Argentina is on the east side. The fantastic thing is that the Andes form effectively a wall. It's not like the Alps where there are passes through. There are virtually no passes, as we would call them, through the Andes. You have to go really high to get over them by any road or anything. From the weather point of view, the wind is mostly from the northwest, the west-northwest, which means that the big wave which you hear about from the Andes is mostly in Argentina. On the Chilean side, which is more fun, in my humble opinion, you're flying on the ridges, but up at 15 to 20,000 feet, at 50 feet above the ground. Whereas on the Argentine side, you'd be flying up at 24 to 30,000 feet all day if you wish to do. Which is why, of course, the Perland project chose to go to Argentina, having thought about New Zealand and everywhere to try and break the highest wave records. I understand they're above 70 grand at the moment, and they're pushing for 90 grand, 90,000 feet in this particular phase of their operation. But that's all on the Argentine side, and we're not talking much about wave today at all. We're talking about low flying. First about the weather. This is a very nice picture from Dave Postlethwaite. Thanks a lot, Dave, with Aconcagua in the background. In the summer, the weather is lovely, and it's mostly like this, believe it or not. But what a lot of people don't get is that there are two systems there. In fact, there are three, but two that really affect us. One is up to about 10,000 feet, and then above 10,000 feet, 10 to 12,000 feet, there is another system called the second system. And the whole behavior of the wind and the thermals is different at whatever height you're at. And you have to be conscious of when you're changing from one system to the other. The trick, of course, is to get on small mountains first, climb up and get higher and higher and higher until you break through to the second system. And then you can do higher speed and higher altitude, higher rates of climb all the way through the sortie. But there is a gotcha there, and that is a lot of people don't realize that with the cloud base going up the mountains, as you go into the range, into the higher mountains, the actual inversion layer will go up as well. And if you go in straight and don't climb at the first ridge or the second ridge, you'll suddenly find yourself below the inversion, and you will not climb whatever you do. And all you can do, it's not dangerous, it's just a bit off-putting, because you're going to have to go all the way around out again and start again. So there is a gotcha there on the way the weather works. Of course, the cloud does come in onto the mountains at times. Generally, though, I've found you can see it way in advance and you can avoid it. And there's loads of lower ground to fly on, to fly around it. So I've very rarely found the cloud to be a problem on track. You can always avoid the higher mountains if they happen to have over-convected a bit. So the weather itself is not an issue, and I would say perhaps even less so in the summer, that is, than it would be in the Alps, where you get quite extensive both local and regional thunderstorms. So good weather. Average temperature at Viticura is about 30 to 32 degrees, and it's very dry, so it's very pleasant. The issue can be in the summer, though, smoke. A lot of these fires are started deliberately, and they will cut the visibility to absolute zero. And one year I was there, they actually closed the whole airspace and told us all to divert. Well, that wasn't our airfield, that was the military. They hadn't realised we were gliders and we were going to land anyway, which is what we did. But smoke can be a hazard, mainly because the Santiago Basin has its own inversion, and any crap that is developed there stays there, and the visibility down in the city can be really poor when we're flying well above it. Next word is about condors. Condors are a wonderful species, 3 meters wingspan on average. They soar like kings, and it's not surprising since the average condor, believe it or not, is about 60 years old. They are everywhere, and if you can see them in advance, they're guaranteed good lift. They do tend to obey the rules of the air in terms of circling the right way, and they're not aggressive. They'll only stick their claws out if they think they're going to hit you. But I wouldn't want to hit one of these mighty birds. But they are the best soarers in the Andes. And of course, they've got junior pilots like we have from Loughborough University, who on this day are obviously doing ground school. A word about Viticura Gliding Club. There's only one big club in Chile, and that is at Viticura, just north of Santiago. It has both the civil club and the military club, and it's the military club we got to know first with their Januses and Nimbus. But most of the instructors there are members of the civil club as well, so once you're in one, you're in both, really. Very, very friendly. A couple of issues, though, that are different from here, and that is insurance is unacceptable or unattainable in Chile because it's so expensive, because they've got so few, the insurers have got so few assets to insure that they put the prices out the sky. So the club actually insures itself. Which means that you, as a visitor, can't fly solo in a club glider unless you're a member of the club, and that's very expensive. It is actually a very rich club. There's only one other club near Santiago, and that's called Ormway, and that has about 4 or 5 gliders, so the scale is completely different. Here they'll have maybe 50 or 60 gliders and loads of fixed-wing powered aircraft and helicopters as well. And they fly every day of the week, and it's great fun, mainly aerotow and self-launch. Getting down there, the logistics, I always take my own glider down there now. I used to borrow a glider down there from friends, which can be done, but you are effectively self-insuring. There's a container that goes down most years from Germany, from the Cobra factory, Mr. Spindelberger, and I have a guaranteed place in that container. The container holds 6 gliders with the wings up the top there, so 3 facing one way, 3 the other way. It makes it affordable. It takes about 2 months, but they are the winter months to get down there and 2 months to get back, which allows me about 6 weeks flying down there, which is not so bad, and I come home for Christmas to stay married. Down below you see the parking there. Because I'm friendly with the Air Force, they give me a slot in their open hangars, which is a standard hangarage down there for most things glider. Because it never rains in the summer, it's lovely and light, but there's quite a problem with dust at times. So people always ask how much does it cost to get down. I would guess between 2,000 and 3,000 euros once you've divided it amongst, that's each, amongst all the gliders in the container. Viticura, for those of you who've seen it, won't be surprised by this picture, but the question is, where's the runway there? In fact, I'll just, the runway is just in there, and precisely there. and it's sandwiched between the edge of the town, the motorway, and the Maputo River. And it's quite interesting, but actually it's not a problem except for the launch options, of which there are very few. One is in the river. There's a couple of polo fields until you get enough height to then turn back and land back. But it is a concrete runway, and they can get a fair launch rate with 3 or 4 tugs when they want to. More people these days, of course, are self-launching, which we started a little while ago. There aren't many clubs, though, where you would, on tow, pass the highest building in South America, which is this tower at 1,000 feet. So it's quite an interesting view of the city as you go off. This is the local mountain. It's called Manquehue, and again, the actual ridge, which works from 1:30 every day, is just in that saddle there. So you get towed up to the saddle. I self-launch, which is 2,200 feet above the airfield, which itself is 2,200 feet above the sea. So that's a guaranteed thermal, believe it or not, every day at the same time, and that's what gets you going, and I'll show you that later with some examples. So that's a brilliant thing to have just on your doorstep. And of course all the local flying for instruction all occurs then to the left of, or to the south, as we're looking at it, of the mountain there. So training is very easy for the local pilots in terms of where they're going to get their lift and how they're going to stay airborne to do the exercises. On the other side, to the east, is Mont San Ramon, and this is, believe it or not, the run home. People tend to go north first because it's higher, and then run very low along the ridges here to get home. And you can actually be on final glide at about 80 kilometers with not a lot of height and still comfortably get home. So this is San Ramon. Imagine waking up to the sight of that every day. Now on to the types of lifts. Well, it's fairly standard, but it's much more aggressive than we'd be used to, even in the Alps. Ridge lift, this is a particular ridge called La Peneta, which is on the Olivares Valley, and that itself is up at 18,000 feet. The ridge, if you fly on this face as we look at it, just fly along it, just normally straight and level, you'll climb at 10 knots plus. It is a scorcher, and up to about 20,000 feet, no trouble, and then set off to the volcano tour, which I'll show you later. So ridge is standard. On competitions and things, people are running the ridges at 200 kph, just below the level of the ridge, where they find the best lift, and basically do not stop to turn unless they get more than 5 to 8 knots. If they haven't got 5 to 8 knots, it ain't worth stopping. And you can do the mathematics yourself, but it works. Wave is standard, except this is not big wave country, except in the south a little bit of Santiago. You can get wave up to 6, 7, 8,000 meters, which is fine. But you can see the Lennies, but you've generally gone north first. So wave is not something you're getting airborne to search for every day, but if you find it, you take it. And of course, the cumulus from thermals. Thermals are very tight and very strong, and a lot of them are blue, except when you get into the hills when the air is pushed a bit higher. It's a technique itself. You have to fly a bit faster and really be aggressive to get the best out of the thermals. But it's very satisfying, of course. And obviously smoke. These forest fires can be used if you need to get home, as we used to in the UK. Now a bit about the terrain. For those of you who know your geography, then Aconcagua, which actually is in Argentina, but we won't go into that, is the highest mountain in the southern and the western hemispheres. It's right, the border is marked by that ridge in front of it, just by the yaw string there. Everywhere we fly there is virtually on the border, because that happens to be the watershed and where most of the good lift is, in the high mountains, I should say. The terrain is just incredible to look at. This is a sort of fortress called El Tordillo, and just to the north of it there's this yellow rock, and the colours are just stunning, which tells you that Chile is just full of minerals. I mean, I'll show you some mines later, but there are all sorts of minerals in all the rocks everywhere. And what's striking about the terrain is there are no villages or anything except in the major valleys. So it's not like the Alps. You are on your own, and there may only be about 3 or 4, or in a comp maybe 20 gliders in the whole country flying. So it's a very, I suppose mountaineers would call it exposure. You feel quite exposed out there on your Todd. The glaciers, as you get higher, we go past lots of glaciers, and I've seen them visibly retreat in the last 20 years. They are spectacular. You would never fly up in this sort of position with a light aircraft, a single engine piston, because you'd have nowhere to go if the engine failed. But in a glider, of course, you can get in there, and technically you could hit the Pacific Ocean before you hit the ground if you flew carefully to the west. There are some high passes. This one again is up at Juncal, Alto Los Leones. This is up at, to cross there you need 4,600 meters, which is 15,500 feet, just to get over that point there. And that's one of the points I'll stress later, is that you need to maintain your height, because you just won't get to the next valley if you don't watch it carefully. If you get high enough, and that means up to 5,500 meters, which would be nearly 20,000 feet, you can do a tour of the volcanoes. And this is one south east of Santiago, which is San Jose, and this is Tumbangatito, which is has a puddle of really evil smelling mud at the soak, but it's still fuming away. To Tingaririca, which is about 200 km south. And even further south is Pretero, which is the furthest south I've been, which is about 250 kilometers due south of Santiago and Vitacura, and it's a long way home. And finally, Volcan Maipo. You've heard of Maipo Valley and the wines. At the end of it, or at the beginning of it, there is this volcano, which is right on the Argentine border again. It's dodgy. It looks very attractive to go to, but when you do go there and try and get back, you find you're faced into a 50-knot headwind, and some people have quite well frightened themselves down there because there's no landing area to get you out of trouble. And finally, on the terrain, copper mines. In our area, which is about 250 kilometers north and 250 kilometers south of Santiago, there are a number of these mines which are several kilometers across and several thousand feet deep, and they do produce good thermals, actually, as long as you always have a way to get out of them. But it just shows the amount of industry that Chile puts into copper mining, which is their main resource. In fact, they're having to diversify now with fruit and wine, obviously, because the copper price goes up and down too much. Okay, so now I'd like to talk about a typical touring route. So, Luke, if I could have the CU, please. And if you could zoom in a little bit. So this is a sortie I did in December. So if you could just start it at about 20 times. So self-launch out of the airfield, around onto the mountain, there we go. And if you can just stop it there, please, if you could. So that's the duty. Can you zoom in just a bit, please, Luke? Because that's the duty thermal. And you can climb from there from 1,400 meters up to about 2,000 meters and then set off. So if you can set it off again now, please, Luke. So that's your duty top up. And what you're doing is you're leaving there at 2,000 meters, and gradually sniffing for where thermals are, and they're generally predictable. This is called Protreros, where they're generally up, climbing all the way into the. Can you just stop it there, please, Luke? Into this area called the Laboratorio, which you then see what sort of day it's going to be, and if it's a really good day, you get above 10,000 feet. You can go on the route on the right, north, which you see in green here, or you have to go outside, as they call it, on the lower ground, but they both end up in the same place. It's just a question of which is quicker. So if you can run that again, Luke. And this is where the ridge running comes. As soon as you get to 3,000 meters, which I've got there, then I'm happy to run, and then I just run all the way around. Might take the odd sniff, but what I find generally is that when I sniff, it doesn't work, and I'm no better off than when I started. So it's better just to run the ridge until you get to the first big decision point. If you just stop it there, Luke, and that is called Las Lagunas, and this tells you what's going to happen for the day. If the weather's really good, you can go to the east, which is to the right on this, into the really high mountains. Otherwise, you have to stay on the outside, as we call it, which is on the relatively low mountains, say 10,000 feet, as opposed to going up to 20,000 feet. So if you can just skip on there, please, Luke. So I decided to go further north and then to go south. So this is the Los Andes Valley. That's a very wide cross of the valley to the next climb. And these are known climb areas, so they're hotspots, and you always route via the known hotspots. Again, staying a little bit on the outside because I'm not getting up to the height needed to get through various passes yet. So if you can speed it up to 40 now, please, Luke. So my aim still is to go south, but I need to get the height to get there. So up near 4,000 meters now. And again, just approaching a duty thermal just there, which is where you get up to your needed 4,000. And then pushing north. All this is ridge flying. There's no point, you see, in flying very much above the ridge, because you're just in normal glide then. If you are on the ridge, you're getting the free ride from the ridge. Because the winds are not necessarily very strong. You get valley breeze, and you get the normal northwesterly wind onto the thing. So can you speed it up a bit, please, now, Luke? I just want to go south. Okay, just going up past one of the mines shortly, called Palambres in the north. That's about 150, 200 k's north. And now I've got enough height to ridge run all the way down to the south. Now you may think, well, there's a lot of mountains over to the right of the screen there, but that's all Argentina. So I'm virtually flying on the border down here, all the way down, past Aconcagua. And you can just zoom out a little bit there, please. Okay, that's Aconcagua, we've just passed there. Down the Olivares Valley, which is probably the most impressive valley in the world. So just crossing over the high point there. And if you can get up to 5,500 meters down here, which is nearly 20,000 feet, you can then go on the volcano tour, which I described earlier. So that's the first one, Tupungatito, then San Jose, then down towards Tingarica and Maipo, and then it's a rat race home. just keeping your height to make sure you don't get pushed further and further into the valley. And final glide from, say, 100 kilometers, no trouble at all. Okay, Luke, if you could just stop that then, please. And if you could just show, to give a feel for what it's like in the higher mountains, could you just show the first ridge running, not the Sailplane Grand Prix one, the other one? That's the one, please. So this gives you a feel of the flying. Okay there, Luke, thanks very much. So back onto that's why I go down there, is for the touring, where you've got no limitations except getting as high as you can and then going as far and as the most interesting route you can, which is great fun. Just a question on techniques. It is necessary, should we say, when you're flying very close to the ridges, to make sure you watch your speed and don't get blown near the ridge. And that's why we in the GSA certainly insist that people have been to the Alps first, because you would frighten yourself quite quickly down here if you hadn't got the confidence to be able to operate very near the ground and some of it reasonably flat initially, but then getting very steep and then into the big high mountains. As I say, it can be very intimidating, but it is incredibly good fun. My strong recommendation also is plan on flying the two-seaters there, which is all you can do anyway, unless you take your glider down, as I do. Because you enjoy the flight with the Chilean instructors, and of course they will let you do all the flying, just act as safety pilot, but tell you which way to go. So that's one sort of flying, that's my favourite sort of flying, but I've also been taking part in the Andes Open Nationals down there internationally, and also the Grand Prix qualifiers, and there have been one or two well-known Grand Prix down there as well. And just to show the difference, though, because they tend not to go or set the tasks into the high mountains. When we do the nationals, by the way, we do set tasks into the high mountains that I've just shown you. But for the Grand Prix, because they want a quick, snappy race, they tend to do it mostly on the flat. When I say flat, it's still up at 8,000 feet, but relative flat. Higher speed type thing to give a more straightforward race, with the odd turning point perhaps inside one of the big valleys. So Luke, can we just run the next piece just to show you how it can be showbiz? There's a bit of artistic license used in this, so I do apologize for it, but it does show some of the lower ground and how people fly on that. So over to you then, Luke, please.
One of the most awesome spectacles in modern sports, Sailplane Grand Prix. Sailplane Grand Prix races are brutally simple. The regatta started with all the planes abreast. The first aircraft across the finish line wins. It's fast. It's intense. It's exhilarating. These are the Sailplane Grand Prix pilots. They represent the elite of the sport. And they're here to race. The title of the world champion is at stake. To achieve that title, first they need to conquer the mountains. Their sleek machines have no engine. Nobody has a power advantage. They have to race from peak to peak, literally gathering energy off the face of the mountains. Energy comes in the shape of plumes of hot air, a wind that runs off the mountains. Both derive from the heat of the sun, of course. The sun is their engine.
Even if you take an experienced glider pilot for their first flight into the mountainous area, they are completely amazed by the way in which energy is available to use, and the way in which you move around the mountain, riding that energy, is really powered by the sun.
There are so many misconceptions about gliding. Gliders, also called sailplanes, are not light. They are not simple. They are slim, but heavy machines. Their wings are filled with water ballast to give them mass so they can more effectively slice through the sky. They typically average 140 kilometers per hour. Flat out, they often hit 300. The pilots will fly into some of the world's highest mountain ranges and race from wing to wing over a course that will stretch everyone to the limit. When they cross the virtual start line, the race is on. Along the way, the gliders top up their energy using thermal. In their world, these are pit stops for refueling, with the same tactical ramifications. Green chooses to climb higher, taking on more energy. He loses seconds, but has the advantage to take a more direct route. Red briefly took the lead, but has to take the long way, hugging the mountain to gain energy in the updrafts. After a few hours racing, it's a mad dash for the line. Red gambles on leaving the thermal early, risking landing short. But Green, with more height and potential energy, can dive at maximum speed, retaking the lead a few seconds before the finish.
Okay, thanks, Luke. So that's the Grand Prix racing for you. Over a beer, if anybody wants to know what really happened on that Grand Prix, I'll let you know. I mean, watching the Dianas go at V&E was quite interesting. But there we are. So just to sum it up, fantastic place to go. They have a limited, they used to try and advertise for visitors. They have a limited capacity to take visitors. But as people like Al Monroe have found, if you give them enough notice, they'll book a Jameson instructor or a duo or a Nimbus or something and take you on such a sortie. But you do need to book it ahead. But I strongly recommend it if you can make it, because it's one of those things that is something you'll never, ever forget. So on that note, if anybody wants any information on it, please don't hesitate to contact me through the BGA or through Buckminster Gliding Club. So now, if Luke would like to referee, I'm happy to take any questions. If Dave Hosselthwaite is listening, I'm not going to talk about my unplanned trip to Argentina. I prefer to forget it. Thank you. Yes, somebody says Adrian Leeming is asking about going north to Antofagasta. The team there have been trying to push. Yeah, sorry, that's it. The local team have been trying to push further and further north, but actually, then they sent a det up there last year. But actually, there is not such reliable lift. It's all to do with the weather and the temperatures, and there are not so many landing slots. So although they're pushing slowly north, they've managed to get 300 kilometers north and to an airfield called Vicuña, but that's only a fraction of the way to Antofagasta. Similarly, going south, it all gets barren and lower and everything. So actually, the magic sweet spot is about, frankly, 300 k's north to about 300 k's south of Vitacura. And that's where most people fly. Next one, please. Yes, sorry, I should have mentioned it. Yes, personally, I oxygenate from the release, really. To get, because I'm getting old, to get loads of oxygen in the body, and then of course above 3,000 meters or 10,000 feet you're on oxygen all the time. Where you've got to be careful though is if you hit some wave and get up above 20,000, you'll probably know that a mountain high with a cannula is not the best thing to have when you're up at 25,000 feet. You should really be on a fully engineered oxygen mask. But yes, it's oxygen, and that's just standard. They just fill the bottles for you every day that you need it. Thanks, John, for that one. Accommodation. Yes, there's loads of hotels, Airbnb and all that stuff. Since I've been going there for a number of years, I stay with the local club members. In fact, they get grumpy if you don't. The people, I should have mentioned, are incredibly friendly and so pro-British, particularly after the Falklands War. They're very well organised and very professional, and they respect the fact that we are as well. And in case you didn't know, there's a chap called O'Higgins who liberated them on the ground, and a chap called Cochrane, who was a naval admiral who liberated them at sea from the Spanish. So the Brits can do no wrong down there as far as they're concerned. Next one, please. There is no airspace. The only airspace is near the main airport, which is in the valley, and only Dragons go into the valley. So there is effectively no airspace for you flying there. Why can't you cross the border? Because they wouldn't let me come back, I should think, and it would cause a bit of a stink, bearing in mind our position on the Falklands. You could organise, and the locals have done it, a crossing the Andes to go to Mendoza, which is to the east, as an organised thing. And as long as you'd flight planned it and got clearance, you could do it. But that's pretty A-level stuff. The problem is, if you go on the downside of that line, which is virtually the watershed, in other words, if rivers flow one way, they're Chilean. If they flow the other way, it's Argentina in general. You ain't going to get back, because the wind is venturing and flowing over the top, and you will end up somewhere on the ground in a heap on the wrong side of the mountains. So if you're going to go to Argentina, go deep south and fly in the wave. But I always call that like kissing your sister. You don't have to enjoy it, but you have to do it occasionally. Next, please. Yes. Anybody? Yes, Gary. Yes, because they would tailor the flight for you, and only if you are comfortable would they take you into the high mountains. You can do all of that much more smoothly. You just won't go as far. But the answer is yes. But I'd strongly recommend going to the Alps first. Next one, please. Yes, thank you, Emma. I think we'd better go to the Alps first before we start going so far there. Next one, please. Yes, I think from Adrian, it's not that simple. You can't borrow or use one of their gliders because there is no insurance. So, and they won't let you anyway. But you can fly in their kit in two-seaters. So you pay for the trip and you pay for the instructor. But I must admit, compared with some places like southern New Zealand, it's a lot cheaper. But, you know, none of this is cheap, really, when you add getting there and everything. I always take my glider because if I'm racing, I like to have my own tuned glider and know exactly what it's going to do from day one. And the S-26 is ideally suited for flying in the big mountains, especially as a self-launcher with enough power if you need to get out of the deeper valleys. Nobody asked this, but in outlanding terms, there have only been something like 10 outlandings in the last 5 years, and there aren't fields to land in. You would never try that, but there is an airfield in every valley or a strip, so you can generally without trouble go there. It's just the embarrassment of ringing in and getting a tow home, and they'll tow you home wherever you are. So frankly, it's not an issue outlanding. Next one, please. Best time of the year is their summer, and my experience is November, December is better than January, February, and I do both. It gets very stable in January, and it's all the holidays and everything as well. Whereas November, December, it's a bit like the Alps early. It really is raring to go, and so that's my recommendation. The best way to fly in mountains, Peter, to learn, is to go down to Cisteron or book a course at Saint-Aubin. They do very reasonable courses that were advertised at the most recent excellent BGA conference with all-in deals flying with French instructors. But go with somebody who's got a two-seater or go with a team, because there are teams that go down to Cisteron every year in April, May generally. And just go in a two-seater and just fly and fly and fly until you're happy. Getting happy near the slopes is a question of practice. And once you have practiced it and you've got the confidence and the safety, then everything else comes. You just get better and better. But you have to have that good grounding to start with in a two-seater with a good mountain pilot. I always fly my S-26E, but because I have friends there. I spent 1 year when I flew an Arcus for 100 hours. That was fantastic, and that's what some of the imagery you saw there. I was loaned a Ventus BT for several years, which I used to race, but I would always try and fly my own aeroplane, which would be the with the Ash-26E. I noticed that Diana and Phil King are asking how many Duff days. That reduced a bit of a joke there, because they always ask me when I'm going to have a rest day, and I say when it rains. Well, in the last 10 years, it's rained for 1 day in Santiago. So the answer is very rarely do you get Duff days. You do get days where you have to work harder to get away and get high. And one thing I didn't show you is there are all sorts of lower routes if you can't get high, and it's almost like a matrix of decision points, and it's strict. If you disobey one of those height limits and go anyway, you won't get further than another 20 kilometers. You have to understand what heights you need to take the next step, but that includes low level heights with airfields to land in if you get too low as well. So the answer is none, or maybe one. Duff days in a month, I mean. That's a very good question, Cervantes. They get to know you and they trust you. Obviously, before you go, you send them your experience and everything, and they'll make sure. If they've got any doubt, they'll have a word with you, but they will give you very close help at all stages. So there's no such thing as a Duff question. You're not just left to get on with it. Somebody will actually hold your hand and help you in every way. But from there on, once you're on the end of the runway and you go, yes, it's down to you. There is a common frequency. We all talk to each other. They all speak English, although there's a lot of gabbling in Spanish going on. Fortunately, I speak Spanish, which helps. But they will chatter to themselves in Spanish. But also in that season, of course, there are lots of English-speaking Germans and Swiss pilots down there as well. So there's loads of mutual assistance in getting on with it. Next one, please. No, the Wankel engine doesn't understand the laws of physics. It just behaves well at any altitude. The highest I've ever used it is about 11,000 feet, but I've never had a problem with it. So the answer is not mine, but others might. By the way, with turbos, yeah, you've got to be careful with a turbo, because if you're not careful, it will take you to the scene of the crash. Then they're just not powerful enough to get out of the valleys, so you just have to land at the next airfield, which is no problem. But you have to use turbos with care in the really high mountains. I haven't flown in Drakensberg. I've flown at New Tempe. I assume they're similar, but they're not as gross. Meaning down there, the mountains are just massive. If you imagine the Alps times 3, that's the Andes. The only even I was flying in New Zealand last year, and even there the play area is much smaller and the mountains are not as big. I think the Himalayas are the only place that compares, and I don't think I'll be flying there soon because the buggers will be shooting at me. So I think it's between the Alps, New Zealand and the Andes for the best places. Well, John, good question. Hey, John, good to hear from you. One of my buddies down there. I'm planning to go this winter, yes. My glider, funny enough, has just come back. It's stuck at Cobra because I can't go over there to pick it up. Fortunately, I pickled the engine, so it should be okay when I come to start it when I get it back. So the answer is I'm planning to go as long as COVID allows me. But I won't go if the COVID thing is still causing a problem. I think we're all going to be stuffed if that happens. Very good question, Gary. The answer is no. There are a couple of ladies who fly, very good ladies who fly at the club down in Vitacura, but they're the same as us, if not as advanced as us. They got one or two youths who are ladies. I'd say it's still a fairly macho society, really, frankly. So the answer is no. Next one. That's a good question, Gary. Again, it is in France. They won't let you fly on most clubs if you don't have high vis on your gliders. In Chile, funny enough, I think I'm one of the only ones who does, except for people who've seen mine and then had them put on when they get the gliders made. So it's not law. In fact, not at all. The issue on mid-airs, though, is slightly different. I mean, you're seeing an area which is over 500 kilometres from north to south, say 600 kilometres, where you'll only have 5 or 6 gliders total in the whole area quite often, for most of the year. So it's not the same issue as the Alps, where it's like the M1 up and down the parkour and you're taking your life in your hands every time. Next, please.
Hold on. I can see a few people have still got some questions.
Okay, no problem. Yes, Dave, that's a very good question. They've got a very sensible but long graduated training system whereby you go onto the Mankeway and stay local and do all your exercises initially and go solo and repeat them and get the circuit sorted out, because it's all, as you know, a high energy circuit. But it's a set pattern, which is very safe, but you've got to do it exactly by their rules, because you don't have a second chance, really. Then they work out in Potreros and spend about 6 months and have to do checks just to be about 20 kilometers north. And then eventually they're allowed to go up to Cobre, which is up near Los Andes Valley. And then eventually, and maybe after a couple of years, they're able to then have, maybe more than a couple of years for most people, they're able to go throughout the whole mountains. And at each stage they're checked. But you can have lots of fun even going local. I mean, compared with, you know, there's no such thing as a bad day. Down there, when the locals sometimes don't fly because they don't think it's a good day, we go and have 5 hours and have great fun. So they need a fair amount, and they're closely supervised. And of course they do it initially in the Blahnik, I should have mentioned that, and Pilatus, which means they actually learn it the hard way. They're not given slippery ships to go off and do it all from day one, as happens in some clubs. I see Gary's asked about accident rates. It's very tricky because the stats are so limited numbers compared with the UK. The UK does have a good record, and the UK BGA is working very hard, and all the instructors are as well, to make it even better. Down there, when things go wrong, they tend to go quite wrong. So I haven't done a direct comparison, but it's like comparing Brighton with London. Jarko, that's a good question about decision points. The answer is yes. It is about experience, local knowledge. It's taken people years. You see, what would happen is if you were supposed to go to X and you went to Y and you had 200 meters too little height, you just won't get to Y. You'll have to turn around and start again, and not start the race again, but start from X again. So the thing is, it is about knowledge and then experience, and then you get a feel for it. But it has to be given to you to start with. And John Gatfield is a good example in this. He and I flew together a lot last year, where I tried to just impart as much knowledge as possible and get it marked on his maps so that he knew what heights he could make for various things. And that just saves so much time. It's not so much a safety issue. It's more an efficiency issue, I would say. So it is about experience and local knowledge, yes. But when you're up at the top of a 20,000 foot mountain, the world's your oyster. You can then go anywhere. It's getting up there is the problem. Yes, Jonas, I'm very old-fashioned military pilot. I use a paper map. No, actually, I use it to plan the sortie, and I may look at it occasionally, but I use an LX9000 like many people, and it's the best thing since sliced breads. Especially the facility which allows you to watch your own spaghetti in a thermal, because quite often the thermals on a ridge will move direction, and it's a great way of regaining it if you think you're not doing your best by using that. So yes, still use paper maps, because that allows you to have a permanent record to quickly glance at, and I tend to use the moving map for then en route stuff. But you can get software data cards with all the border points in, because they're not marked by anything otherwise, and all the turning points, and you can put various key points with altitude as well if you want. So you can do it either way, Jonas, if you've got the time.